He's also under fire after his town hall at CNN. Now, an audience member asked him whether curbing population growth will be a feature in his plan to address the climate catastrophe, and here's what he said.
Women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
Now, CNN's Essie Cupp tweeted that population control through abortion for the sake of climate is talking about eugenics. Now, for those of you who don't know what eugenics is, it's the science of selective and controlled breeding in an effort to increase characteristics and traits deemed desirable. Now, that's very different than what Bernie was talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure why people are upset with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are distorting what he said. And I think that, you know, folks have been talking about population control for a really long time.
Right.
Because there was, you know, there have been global discussions about that. I don't know that people have talked about it under the rubric of climate change. Al Gore has spoken about it in that sense, but I don't think any Democratic candidate has talked about it. And so I think that's why you're hearing the backlash.
Isn't population one of the biggest issues in the world right now?
It's actually not. Population growth is on the decline.
Right.
The world's population is projected to nearly stop growing by the end of the century. And in all clarity, I think people know this, but Essie Cupp is one of my closest friends, and I agreed with that. We were actually texting each other when this moment happened in the climate change debate, because I do think anytime you're talking about population control, if you're a pro-life person, it starts sounding alarms. Because again, like in China, they enacted a one-child policy, and now men outnumber women by 70 million in China and India.
But
I think for me, when you're talking about
That's because they were throwing the children away.
But when you're talking about,
one of
it's
them is my
disgusting.
sister, by the way, who was left on the street at 2 months old.
Yeah.
No, but Megan, to your point, though, it's to your point. It's scary what happens when you do that.
But this is not eugenics.
Well, that's the thing. So you and Essie were.
I believe it's a slippery slope towards that, and I do think this dystopian, hellhole, nightmarish hellscape that Democrats are putting out, that climate change is just going to end everything to the fact that we're going to have population control in this country, seems very extreme.
Climate change is real.
I'm not saying it's not real. I'm saying it's not. I didn't interpret it in the same way that obviously everyone in the Democratic Party was.
What he's saying is that women around the world, just like in this country, should have access to birth control and
family planning.
Which includes abortion.
I know, but when that's a whole different thing than when you're talking about population
But it's not
control through
eugenics.
abortion.
When AOC
Eugenics
says
is
we
a
shouldn't have
different-
children anymore for climate change, that is scary to people.
Not
So
just her.
when you're
Prince Harry and Princess Markle only say 2 children.
But here's where we are in bigger picture here with politics. It's either President Trump or if Bernie Sanders is nominee. You have him saying things like this, and terrorists should have a right to vote.
Okay, but here's the thing.
Where do people
Whatever
like
he
me to
has
go?
said, let's be clear about what he is saying.
Yeah.
Let's not make something up when it's not what he said. Because when you bring in eugenics, that's a different conversation. That is the controlling of a population because you don't like the size of your nose, or they're too dark, or they have
or their eyes aren't blue.
But it also disproportionately impacts minorities and people with disabilities.
Eugenics doesn't have anything to do with minorities or anybody else. And I will say this to you also. Think about all the women in Ireland who for years just wanted birth control. They just wanted birth control because they live in a Catholic country that said you cannot have it. They were having an insane amount of children. What these women fought for and pressed for and marched for was the right to make that decision for themselves. I think that's clearly, and maybe I misinterpreted it, but when he says, I think especially in poor countries around the world where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, that's something I support. That's different than eugenics.
Maybe it's one of the issues that if you're through the prism of a conservative, you hear it differently from him, and if you're the prism of a liberal, you hear it differently, because when I saw it, I was shocked by what was coming out of his mouth, and clearly everyone else at the table thought it was normal and just in the vein of climate change.
I don't think
Excuse me, except
population.
you.
I don't think population. I think you need to be careful when you talk about it. But I'm still confused at what that has to do with the question he was asked, which was about climate change.
That I don't know.
I'm lost in this whole
Well,
population.
it has to do
climate
with
change
using up the
conversation.
resources of the world. The more
Population
people you
growth
have,
is on the
Can I
decline.
say a sentence here?
Well, if it's factual.
All right, never mind.
Yeah.
I think I'll play that game.
And the population is going to go from, I think, 7 billion to 11 billion. And so there is somewhat of an increase.
Listen, you can be pissed at what he said all you
I
want
actually
to.
think it-
Report it correctly.